Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our session all about Windows Virtual Desktop. Thank you for joining us on today's conference all about the Microsoft 365 technologies. WVD is probably the technology that maybe stands out here. Maybe it shouldn't even belong on a Microsoft 365 day, as it's not technically part of that suite of tools. It sits alongside inside of Azure. But from my perspective, Windows Virtual Desktop, the clue's in the name. It's all about the end user. It's all about how we are delivering technology to our users. So I think it is really important that we connect these technologies together. And I think it's an important aspect that many organizations are looking at moving forward. My name is Barry Coombs. I've been working at Computer World now for well over 13 years. I've specialized in a number of technologies, including end user computing technologies, and I've been lucky enough to write a number of books on the subject with people from the likes of VMware. Today, I don't spend much time down in the technical weeds. I've got a fantastic team here at Computer World that are able to help us design, architect, and implement these solutions. And talking of those teams, I'd like to introduce Adam Gleason, who sits on the pre-sales architecture team here at Computer World. Adam, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit on your background and where you're focusing today?
Sure, thanks, Barry. Hi, my name's Adam Gleason. I'm an EUC specialist. I've been working in the EUC space in one form or another for the last 16 years. I've been at Computer World for the last 7 years, and I'm a fairly recent, in the last 18 months, achieved my VMware Horizon VCAP qualification. However, the current specialism that we're really looking at, that I've really been focusing on, is Windows Virtual Desktop, and really excited to be here today to share my knowledge with everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Adam. And I think like a lot of technologies that we're seeing in the Microsoft end user computing space, a lot of the technologies are relatively new, like Teams, like WVD. We've seen a mass maturity happen, certainly over the last year, over the COVID period, of technologies that were quite new, were quite fledgling, that are now coming to fruition. So we've got a good selection of topics available today. If we have a look at the agenda, you'll see the elements that we're going to be covering. We want to kind of give you an overview of what WVD is, why people are turning to it and looking at it today. Deep dive into the user experience. What can users expect? What can admins expect? What are the components that make it up? And then hopefully leave you with a few final thoughts to consider how you could be adopting WVD in your organization, and hopefully how we here at Computer World could be helping you. So Adam, to get us started then, do you just want to kind of give us a 50,000-foot view of what WVD is? We're going to dive into some of the technical elements a little bit later, but do you want to describe what it is and where it's come from?
Well, in a nutshell, it's an Azure-hosted EUC platform that's enterprise grade and is arguably one of the best ones out there at the moment.
So it's kind of taking what we've seen for years and years around VDI and the platforms that you've been able to have, and even before that, I suppose, session-based desktops, those Citrix presentation servers, Zen app technologies, and allowing you to consume it in a cloud model in Azure, close to the rest of your other workloads that you'll be moving with Microsoft 365 and Azure.
Absolutely, yeah.
So why is it so relevant at the moment? What is making WVD stand out to people, that meaning the adoption is so high at the moment?
Well, the elephant in the room is, of course, the COVID pandemic. It's driven remote working solution adoption across the board in most organizations today. It's also accelerated the Office 365 adoption with a focus on email and Teams in particular to allow that sort of online collaboration and people to work remotely.
So I think there's been this ongoing joke in the EUC community that it will be the year of VDI next year, kind of thing. And this was led by the fact that organizations all went down to the server virtualization route. One organization did it, more organizations did it, everybody went on that same journey. And it had such a massive impact on the way that we manage servers, the way that we were able to grow and scale our server infrastructure. Everyone assumed that the next thing was going to happen is we were going to virtualize the desktops. It seemed like the next logical thing, right? It's the next block of tin with CPUs and RAM in it. But it never really came as a single swipe, did it? So has the coronavirus pandemic been the year of VDI, or more importantly, the year of WVD?
Arguably, yes. But I will go back and just correct you there, that the same adoption rate that we saw with server virtualization did happen with desktop virtualization. But the problem was that the technology wasn't there to actually facilitate that and make it a practical alternative. And specifically, that was around the storage performance. Many organizations didn't really understand that EUC workloads are very different to server workloads. So the storage performance wasn't there. Mistakes were made and lessons were learned, and that is not a problem now. And indeed, the year of the virtual desktop, after so many years of us in the EUC community waiting, has finally arrived in 2020 and continues, in fact, into 2021.
So I think two really good points there, Adam. I think the first is VDI was and is still really relevant to a lot of organizations. Those organizations that have looked to standardize their desktop, they've looked to centralize them into a data center so the data never leaves the data center, so you can have enhanced security, you can have ease of management, you can offer things like graphics intensive workloads to a wide variety of people out of the main office location. But one of the challenges that we've seen with that is the constant refresh of that hardware. Every 3 to 5 years, you're having to replace that hardware or grow that hardware as the demand grows. Every iteration of Microsoft Teams client that comes out, we probably need more CPU and RAM to be able to run it. So we need to reassess what the desktops need to have. And secondly is getting that hardware specification right. As you touched upon, 5, 6, 7 years and more ago, it was very difficult. We had to have lots of spinning disks to get the performance we need. It was very difficult. Today, with SSD technologies, it's easier as long as companies are willing to pay to get the right technology. I suppose one of the benefits with consuming this as a service is not having to worry so much about those elements behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I mean, it completely removes the whole hardware refresh and moves you from the CapEx model to an OpEx model. So you're from your finance director's perspective, the costs across the business for the IT estate are going to be far more predictable than they've ever been before.
Definitely. And I think the other point here is, and certainly during the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen this a lot, organizations needed to make their workloads flexible. They needed to make them mobile. They needed to allow them to be accessed anywhere. Now, those are organizations that were 100% in the cloud, using Office 365, maybe Salesforce.com and things like that. We're able to do that relatively quickly. And probably, to be honest with you, don't need WVD for every single reason, because they will be able to just log on to any machine, access it in the cloud, and off you go. But to be honest with you, those organizations that are 100% cloud-based are few and far between. We've all got a few applications that are not there. We've all got file servers that are still not there. We've generally today and for the long-term future still got a need for a Windows desktop. So WVD allows us to be able to present those workloads down to the user, even when they may not be truly a mobile flexible workload, because we can deal with those aspects behind the scenes.
Exactly, yeah.
So as we kind of get into this, I think it's always really important to kind of show what the experience looks like to a user. And this is something that you and I have been doing for many years. And I often reflect it's probably one of the most dullest demonstrations that we deliver, but it's also one of the most important. Let's just show how this technology works. So Adam, do you want to kind of give us an overview as to what a day in the life of a WVD user will look like, so our audience can see that?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest changes that has happened in the WVD experience is that the traditional Microsoft solutions have been rebuilt from the ground up, taking account of a lot of the shortcomings of the past. One of the biggest issues that the Windows RDS in particular has had in the past is via the access mechanism. It was always very clunky. It wasn't very slick. The likes of VMware Horizon and Citrix both had their own client component, which meant that all of the applications were presented to the user in a nice, logical manner. Well, Microsoft have done that now with the remote desktop client, which does exactly that. The user logs in, authenticates, and they're presented with the applications that they need, that they have access to, and indeed the virtual desktops that they've got access to as well. And it's as simple as a one click, and it launches straight into the desktop. He says, there we go. My sacrifice to the demo gods this morning was accepted, apparently.
Live demos are always a worry.
Yeah, always. And here we have a Windows 10 desktop environment. As Barry said, it's not really that exciting. What's exciting is that this is running in the cloud. It's completely scalable, so we can just move this up or down. We can even automatically scale the extent of the desktop environment. So yeah, it's a Windows 10 desktop, and it works, and it's nice and responsive as well.
So the desktop you're demonstrating here, Adam. So first of all, you were on a Windows PC in this example, based out in Gloucestershire, where you're working from home today. And then you're connecting to a WVD desktop that is hosted in an Azure data center in the UK.
Yes, in the UK South data center, there's 2 Azure ones in the UK.
And I think one of the important things is WVD is available in the global Azure data centers. So if you work for an organization that has people in multiple locations, data in multiple locations, you could design WVD to be available either close to the data or close to the user from that aspect.
Absolutely, but that also plays into the resilience perspective as well, and is another component with regards to what Microsoft have considered when they rebuilt the WVD platform from scratch. It's highly resilient by design in an individual data center, but you can also add much greater resilience by actually spreading the desktops across regions, which, as well as the resilience, as you've just alluded to, Barry, it also means that you can then have desktops that are running geographically local to where your users are accessing them from, just to make sure that they're getting the best possible experience.
Definitely. And in terms of use cases, in the early days, we kind of looked for low-hanging fruit. So going back 10 years plus kind of thing, we looked for very simple users that did very simple things for VDI desktops and things like that. In the later years, when we saw the NVIDIA cards coming into the VDI and things like that, it was very much those people that had graphics intensive workloads that saw real benefits, because they were able to go home and work from their home PC, but still get the benefit of a very fast desktop behind the scenes. Does WVD cater for those advanced graphics scenarios? Are there GPU options and things like that available?
Absolutely. I've actually seen some people, they obviously have bottomless pockets or very deep pockets, but I've seen people running the likes of online computer games from WVD, utilizing the graphics technology, just to demonstrate that level of graphics intensity can be catered for on the WVD desktop. So in short, really, there isn't that much that you can't do with a WVD desktop these days.
Fantastic. So even from a mobility perspective, you've got workers, typically you'd buy them multiple £1,000s worth of workstations to do their work. They'd have to come into the office to do that. Now we can unlock that and they can go work from home. So the other thing sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, not only that, but the data is staying inside the organization. In large design organizations, then there's a lot of value invested in the intellectual property, and having people using that data at home on their local PC and having that stored there is a considerable risk. Having it all central in a WVD environment means that you're able to really protect your own intellectual property as well.
Definitely, and we've seen things like manufacturing companies and architecture companies be able to leverage these technologies to mobilize and secure the data.
Exactly.
One of the final things before we kind of move on, or a couple of things. The first thing is, obviously you connected from a Windows 10 desktop to a Windows 10 desktop, but the device you're using there could be a thin client or a repurposed device, couldn't it?
Absolutely. So that was another one of the shortcomings of the old Windows client, Windows virtual desktop access mechanism. The RD client that I showed you just before is available on all of the major operating systems. So it's available for iOS, Android, Mac OS. So pretty much any operating system that you need it on, it's going to be there for you to be able to do that. And obviously, a lot of the thin clients use Linux, which is the equivalent to the Android application.
Definitely. So if you've got either legacy thin clients or PCs that you want to be using as now just a connectivity device to your desktop in the cloud, you could put the iGel operating system on it, repurpose that as a thin client, have a much more secure, easy to manage edge device with all the desktops then being in the data center.
Absolutely.
And one of the bits you did touch upon, if we have a look at the screenshot that we've got now, is we can do more than just publish desktops from this, can't we? We can publish applications. And for those organizations that maybe have got 80% of their apps in the cloud, they want the users to be able to use those natively, not connect to the desktop. We could just publish the more traditional or legacy applications down as applications only.
Exactly, yeah. So if a user doesn't need to run an entire desktop environment because they only need to access a single application, for example, then you can just publish the single application and the users can consume that as they need it, rather than having to go through the rigmarole of logging into a full desktop, launching the applications there. It can often mean sometimes that it makes it more practical to use a mobile device like a tablet, because you're not having to navigate a desktop in order to access the application. You can just go straight into the application.
Fantastic. So as we move on then, are you able to talk us through some of the specific benefits of using WVD over the other platforms that you could be using, such as a VDI platform or another desktop as a service provider?
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple of unique benefits that you only get with WVD. The obvious one, first of all, is the fact that if you're Microsoft 365 enabled, if you've moved stuff into 365, that is all logically local to the Azure cloud where your WVD stuff is going to be sitting. So from a user experience perspective, that is the best possible solution that you can have. With some of the components that we will come on to in a moment, like Fxlogix, it also means that you can cache Exchange or OneDrive information, which is a bit of a challenge when you're doing that on VDI. Alongside the sort of Microsoft experience being there, Windows 10 multi-session is a feature that is unique to WVD. You can't get this anywhere else. And this is the principles of RDS, but using a desktop operating system. As we've talked about before in previous sessions, then sometimes you do have difficulty virtualizing applications on server operating systems such as RDS. By being able to use Windows 10 multi-session, it means that those applications that need a desktop operating system can have that desktop operating system, but you can have the benefit of having a nice high user density, of having multiple users per individual VM. So it will bring your overall costs down. There's also the ability to run Windows 7 with extended security updates, and this applies to Windows Server 2008 R2 as well. Both products went end of life on the 14th of January last year, and without having a fairly expensive extended security updates contract agreement in place with Microsoft, running Windows 7 in a continued manner is quite risky because it's not been patched from a security perspective. So if you're stuck in that position, and some people still are, that they have applications that must run on Windows 7, you can use WVD to deliver that and have the peace of mind that your desktops are being patched as well.
Fantastic. So we've got a number of exclusive benefits there that WVD brings that not only allow us to kind of keep the cost down, but also ensure that whilst we're doing that, that the user experience is what they would expect. Previously, when we've used session-based solutions like RDS before, we've been able to get greater density to mean that we keep the cost down, but the users have to kind of deal with using a server operating system that doesn't feel quite the same as using a desktop operating system, as well as then at the point you mentioned, the application compatibility side of it. Whilst I appreciate that you're not a licensing and pricing expert for this, can you talk us a little bit around the kind of the mechanisms that you have to use to pay for this, the licensing, the cost, and how that's worked, how that's calculated?
So licensing, a lot of people will already be licensed for this if they have Microsoft 365 subscriptions, for example. But it's just standard licensing the way that you would do your traditional Windows 10 desktop estate. With regards to the actual costs that you're going to incur on Azure, based on the assumption that you've already got Microsoft 365 in place, then you're literally going to be paying your consumption and storage costs in Azure. And unlike a lot of the other cloud platforms, the Azure costs are based on hourly usage. So you literally are only paying for what you actually use.
And I suppose that's one of the benefits of working with a partner like Computerworld. We're able to work with you to understand the best automations and things like that to keep those costs down. You don't want to leave desktops on all night for 500 users if actually you can scale up, scale down, turn it on and off on demand and get that cost to optimal whilst the users getting the optimal experience when they need that.
Exactly, and you've got a full range of auto scaling features to do exactly that. Most of them are available only via command line at the moment, but I'm sure that as time goes on and the technology matures, that those sorts of things will be added into a GUI. But it gives you the ability to dynamically scale your desktop deployment up and down, or indeed statically scale it. So you may want to say, well, overnight people aren't going to be using the environment, so why should we have it all switched on? Let's scale it right back and maybe retain a very small footprint just to allow someone to work late at night if that's what they wanted to do. But you certainly don't need the full desktop estate deployed.
Fantastic. So let's change tracks a little bit here. Let's have a look at the technical architecture for WVD. If we put on screen there that logical architecture, Adam, are you able to give us a high-level overview as to some of the components here and what makes up a WVD environment?
Certainly. So at the top of the screen, we have the remote desktop client that I've just shown you already. Moving down, that client would then come in and connect into the WVD management service, which is essentially the control plane. That control plane, once the user is authenticated, will then pass the user through into the Azure subscription area, which is where your resources actually reside and which is where any file services that you have that are going to be delivering your user persona storage, and indeed the session hosts themselves. That's where that's all going to reside. And then, of course, alongside that, you've got existing components that you will probably already have, such as Azure Active Directory and Office 365 there at the bottom.
Fantastic. So a number of these components are components that people are already going to have in place, such as Azure Active Directory and Office 365. And then it's a matter of the kind of management components and the desktops, leveraging the multi-session. So hopefully we don't need as many desktops. We've got the golden images, so we've got opportunities to be able to offer different allocation models for desktops, whether that is something that the user comes back to a dedicated desktop or whether it is something that a user will come back to a desktop in a pool of desktops that are available.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's move on. There's a couple of features that I specifically wanted us to touch on at a very high level. The first one was MSIX App Attach. It's relatively new technology. Do you want to talk about what it is and why it might be a consideration as part of this?
Certainly. So MSIX is a new technology from the WVD perspective. The principle of MSIX App Attach is not new. This has been reproduced previously with VMware's App Volumes or Liquidware's Flex App. And the idea is to disassociate the application from the underlying desktop image. And what I mean by that is that rather than having each application installed on the desktop image, you install the application into its own package, which is then mounted as a VHD, and that gets layered on top of the desktop at logon. The principle behind doing this is that if you have several different gold VMs that you have to manage because they each have different application requirements, you can reduce that several gold VMs down to a single one and then layer the applications based upon user group membership or something like that. So in larger organizations, it makes a lot of sense because it really cuts the management overhead right down with regards to when you have to apply updates or do new software deployments onto your gold VMs, because you can just sort of maintain the single image and apply the user persona and the applications separately.
So it's all about that simplification, isn't it? Where different desktops would need different characteristics, different applications, rather than having to have a separate pool for each of those and the admin overhead that is associated with that, you're able to kind of overlay these things as differences on top of a standardized layer. And I think the next technology, Fxlogix, has a similar principle, but for a different use case. This is more around the persona.
Absolutely. So with regards to how it gets layered on top of the operating system, the same applies both with Fxlogix and with App Attach. As far as the user or the operating system itself is concerned, it just looks as if it's been installed locally on the machine. So there's no visible difference. The only way that you can see the difference is from behind the scenes, whereby you have these virtual hard disks. Now, what the application, the App Attach, does for the desktop for applications, Fxlogix is doing the same, but for the user persona. Now, historically, user persona has been something that's been quite tricky to get right. Windows originally, or the Microsoft original implementation of roaming profiles, whilst it was good in principle at first, as the amount of information that we were storing in these profiles started to increase, they rapidly became a real chore to work with because it slowed the logon experience down, especially if you were caching huge amounts of data, such as in email or file data or anything like that, or indeed when the users drop massive files onto their desktops. It takes ages for the roaming profile to be copied down. And of course, the user's logon experience is extended by that same amount of time. Fxlogix gets around this by storing all of the user persona and profile information in a virtual hard disk that gets attached at logon and detached at logoff. So it means that as the user moves between a pool of virtual desktops that you have deployed, their customizations and their environment profile and persona will roam with them. And that includes the Microsoft Exchange cached information and any OneDrive files. So it allows them to really have a very laptop or desktop-like experience, but in a virtual environment without any of the shortcomings that we've typically had to deal with. Because the VHD is being attached and then layered over the operating system, it also means that it's instantaneously there. So we don't have any of these delays that were typically associated with roaming profiles.
Definitely. So that's really good. So we've got, from a user perspective, we've got their desktop. It's customized. It's got all the stuff that's important to them. It's quick and it's easy. And from an IT admin perspective, we've got abstraction, which means that we can manage it easier. We can keep it up to date easier. So those technologies are really important.
Absolutely.
So onto the kind of the final section here then, Adam, are we able to show a demonstration of the admin experience? So just give a bit of an overview as to what those people that are watching can expect from an admin side.
Okay, so the administration of WVD is performed via the ARM, the Azure Resource Manager console. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I have grouped all of my WVD resources into a single resource group, and that's what we can see here on the screen. So the hierarchy, it starts off with a workspace, and within that workspace, the workspace is what this chap over here, the RD client, the workspace is what that is going to connect to. And then displayed within that workspace are going to be the applications that we've got deployed and the virtual desktops that we've got deployed. And as you can see, the applications are grouped via application groups, and the desktops are grouped via host pools. And within each of these different things, so within the application group, there will be a number of VMs, and the published applications are running on those VMs. Similarly, the virtual desktops are included in a separate host pool, and the VMs that are hosting those virtual desktops reside in there. So it means that we've got good, clear segmentation between applications and the virtual desktops. And it also means that what's happened in the past, or what people have been able to do, is to mix and match users running desktops with users running applications. And more often than not, it tends to start not working terribly well, because a desktop starts to consume lots of resource, and that affects how well the applications are running. So there's nice segmentation here. And then, of course, all of the other stuff that you can see here is the typical stuff that you would have associated with any virtual machine. An OS disk, you might have data disks. We have a storage account that the storage components are residing in, and we have a NIC. And then, of course, we have the virtual machine itself.
Fantastic. Thanks for that overview there, Adam. I think an important point for anyone that is watching, that if you think this technology is useful to your organization, but maybe you're looking at this and thinking, but this bit looks quite complicated, there's lots of bits and pieces in there, your best bet is have a chat with Adam, have a chat with us at Computerworld. We're able to offer this as a managed service where you can just focus on the desktop, what's on the desktops, and supporting the user's desktop activity, and we can take care of the WVD bits behind the scenes for you. So whatever you want to do, what model works for you, if you just want to be trained and brought up to speed with this, or you want us to manage that, we can do that. So as we kind of wrap up now, Adam, as we get to the final thoughts, anyone that's kind of considering WVD, what would be your recommendations in terms of how we kind of understand the requirements, how we're able to demonstrate to them and put together some options for them?
So the initial conversations that we always have are around the workloads that we need to support on the new desktop platform. Apart from anything, it's to verify that we can't see any obvious blockers, that there's going to be something that is just clearly impractical and it's not going to work. Once we've done that, we would then look to set up a small proof of concept environment in the Azure cloud. And then that allows the customer to gain confidence that what we're actually talking about is going to be feasible, it is going to be practical, and it allows their users then to actually start using the application.
Fantastic. So I think we've given people some good options here to have a look into WVD. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of what is included inside WVD. And I highly recommend that you reach out to either Adam or your account manager to understand how we can help take you on that journey that Adam just described, to first of all understand what type of workload you've got. We can use various assessment tools to do that, to go and do a proof of concept, so you can build confidence, get some users involved, get champions involved, and then hopefully move that out to production and help you manage and maintain that moving forward. Adam, thank you ever so much for joining us today. If anyone does want to reach out, please reach out to your account manager. Thank you for watching.